So we all see Congress, giving speeches and doing press conferences, right? That's the polished image.
Right.
But a recent report, it's kind of pulled back the curtain. And what some members of Congress themselves are describing is, well, frankly, it's pretty jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
We're talking about like claims of sex, drugs, and dementia.
Wow.
Being present within Congress itself.
Yeah. That's a heck of a headline.
It is a heck of a headline.
Sex, drugs, and dementia in Congress. It does make you want to click.
It does make you want to click.
Let's unpack this.
Let's unpack it. So the source that we're looking at today is from Politico.
Okay.
And they interviewed 25 House members.
Okay, so these are representatives.
Yeah. And it was a bipartisan group.
Okay, so it's not just, Democrats complaining about Republicans or vice versa.
Right. And what's really interesting is the aim of the piece wasn't to dig up scandals.
Interesting.
It was really to understand what their day-to-day lives are like.
Okay, so just like a day in the life type of piece.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A day in the life. And what's really fascinating about it is how candid some of these members were.
Really?
They really were.
So they just let loose?
And, they revealed aspects of Congress that you wouldn't normally think about.
I see.
And it definitely challenges our conventional image of what we think goes on.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
So that's what we're going to be diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key insights from this report?
Okay.
What are these people saying about their workplace?
Yeah, and for you listening out there, if these are firsthand accounts from a pretty good cross-section of Congress, what does this tell us about how this whole branch of government works?
Yeah, this is a branch of government that affects all of our lives.
Right.
So let's just jump right into it.
Okay.
One of the things that this report highlighted is alcohol consumption.
Okay.
Now, multiple members reported seeing widespread drinking among their colleagues.
Okay.
Now, to be clear, we're not saying that they're falling over drunk on the House floor during votes. But one member actually did claim to have witnessed instances where people were visibly impaired while voting.
Okay, so that's concerning.
It is concerning.
Yeah.
But I think a really interesting detail from this report is that there's actually a bar within Congress itself that opens after 5 p.m.
Like a congressional bar.
A congressional bar.
Okay.
So it's not just, individual members choosing to go out and have drinks.
Right.
It's like it's woven into the social fabric of Capitol Hill.
Yeah. And, it makes sense if you think about it. these people are under a lot of pressure.
Right.
Probably a good way to, blow off some steam.
Right.
Connect with your colleagues.
Exactly. Network.
But, yeah, you could definitely see how that line between just relaxing and having a couple drinks and being potentially impaired could get blurred.
Especially when you're talking about the types of decisions that are being made.
Exactly. These are huge decisions that affect the entire country.
Right. And it really makes you think about the culture of Congress if alcohol is playing such a prominent role.
Yeah. What does that say about the environment they're working in?
And here's where it gets a little bit scary.
Oh, boy.
Because we're not just talking about drinking.
Mm-hmm.
The report actually alleges that at least a dozen members of Congress may lack the mental capacity needed to effectively do their jobs.
Okay, wait a minute. So you're saying there are members of Congress who maybe shouldn't be there?
That's what this report is alleging.
That's pretty disturbing.
It's pretty disturbing. Think about the issues that they're dealing with.
Right. These are not simple things. We're talking about national security, the economy, healthcare,
education.
Yeah. Incredibly complex issues.
And the thought that multiple people in these positions might not be fully capable is a little unsettling.
It's more than a little unsettling.
It's very unsettling.
Yeah.
And to give you some specific examples,
okay,
the report says that some members are voting on bills they haven't even read.
What? How is that even possible?
I don't know. But that's what the report claims.
So they're just pushing buttons without knowing what they're voting on.
Apparently.
How can you represent your constituents if you don't even know what you're voting for?
Right. There was even an anecdote about some lawmakers spending 3 or 4 hours at that congressional bar.
Oh, right. The one we talked about.
The one we talked about before, an 11 p.m. vote.
Okay.
And then they were completely unfamiliar with the very material they were supposed to be voting on.
Oh, my gosh. So they're just hanging out at the bar and then stumbling in to vote?
That's the picture that this report is painting.
That's just irresponsible.
It's incredibly irresponsible.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder about the level of accountability that's present in Congress.
How can you hold someone accountable if they're not even paying attention to what they're doing?
And it also makes you wonder about what kind of support system is in place
for
new members.
Right. Because, if you're brand new to Congress, That must be completely overwhelming.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of information they have to process is enormous.
Right. Are they getting any training or guidance on how to handle all of that?
So the report also brought up another interesting point.
Okay.
And that is the diverse backgrounds of many members of Congress.
Okay.
And how some of them might not have the traditional expertise that you might expect.
I see.
For a job like this.
That's interesting because I think a lot of people have this image of their elected officials as being, these highly educated experts with years of experience.
Exactly.
But according to this report,
The reality
might be quite different.
quite different, yeah.
So what kind of backgrounds are we talking about here?
Well, they gave some pretty striking examples.
Okay.
There were people who were previously a debit insurance salesperson,
Okay.
a one-time school board member,
All right.
a bar owner.
Interesting.
And this is where it gets colorful. Yep. The report mentions a strip joint next door and a used car dealership in the same breath.
Wow, they really threw that in there.
They did.
Okay.
And then also a car dealership owner.
Okay, so a pretty wide range of background.
A very wide range.
Then, those aren't bad jobs.
Of course not.
But it does make you wonder how prepared they are to go from those roles to tackling, these huge national policy challenges.
Right. It's a pretty big jump.
It's a massive jump.
And they even named some names.
Oh, really?
To illustrate this point.
Like who?
They mentioned Lauren Boebert.
Okay.
Who notably doesn't have a high school degree.
Interesting.
They mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Okay.
Who owned a CrossFit gym.
A CrossFit gym.
Funded by her parents.
Right.
And then they mentioned Matt Gaetz.
Okay.
Who was a lawyer for a short time.
Okay, yeah. So these are all names that we recognize.
Exactly. They're all very well known. And the report makes this point that you have people going from minimum wage jobs straight to Congress.
That is a big leap.
It's a huge leap.
Yeah.
And it really makes you wonder if they have the knowledge and experience necessary to do this job effectively.
Yeah, because on the one hand, it's great that, anyone can run for office.
Right.
And that it's accessible to people from all walks of life.
Right.
But on the other hand, you do need a certain level of expertise to make informed decisions on these complex issues.
Absolutely. And the report actually talks about the idea of a grace period.
Okay.
Or some kind of acclimation process for new members.
I like that idea.
I do too.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they're sworn in, they have this immense responsibility.
Right. They're voting on things like the national budget.
Exactly. And they're expected to understand these complicated issues right away.
Yeah. That's a lot to ask of someone who's never dealt with this stuff before.
They actually mentioned one congresswoman who was making $15 an hour.
$15 an hour?
At Burger King before being elected.
Wow, that's quite a story.
It is quite a story.
That's the American dream right there.
It is the American dream, but it also makes you think, how prepared is someone with that background to deal with national budgeting or foreign policy?
Right. Are they getting the support they need to make these big decisions?
Right.
And it kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier with the mental acuity issue. Right. Because if you're thrown into this high-pressure job without any real preparation, it's easy to see how you could get overwhelmed and maybe not make the best decisions.
Now, there were a few other things that the report mentioned that kind of paint a picture of what life is like in Congress.
Right.
And one of those things is that there are apparently a lot of extramarital affairs going on.
Really?
One member described it as shocking.
Wow.
So it seems like there's a lot of personal drama happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. It is a high-pressure environment.
Right.
They're all working long hours away from their families.
Right.
I guess it kind of makes sense in a way. Right. But still, it's surprising to hear that it's so widespread.
It is surprising.
Yeah.
And it does make you wonder how all that drama affects their ability to focus on their jobs.
Right. Because their personal lives are their personal lives.
Right.
But if it's interfering with their ability to do their jobs effectively, that's a problem for the whole country.
And then there's the issue of salary.
Okay.
Which you wouldn't think would be a big deal.
Right. Because, they make a good amount of money.
They do make a good amount of money.
About $174,000 a year.
But one member actually complained about the pay.
Really?
Saying that it's not enough.
Wow. I guess it's all relative.
It is all relative.
Yeah.
And they argued that it's not enough considering the high cost of living in D.C.
That's true. D.C. is an expensive city.
It's a very expensive city.
Yeah.
And they also talked about the demands of the job.
Right. They're working all the time.
They're working all the time.
They're constantly traveling.
Right. They have to maintain 2 residences.
Right. One in their home state and one in D.C.
Exactly.
Yeah, that adds up.
And they were actually quoted saying people don't understand, for my first 2 years here, I didn't even have a car.
Wow.
And we make so little money, SLE in my office.
SLE. So they were sleeping in their office.
Apparently.
Because they couldn't afford an apartment.
That's what it sounds like.
I mean, that's a pretty tough situation.
It is a tough situation, but the report seemed to suggest that maybe some of these financial struggles are due to poor financial management.
Okay, so maybe they're not budgeting properly.
Possibly.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
But it does highlight this disconnect.
Right.
Between how the public perceives members of Congress as being, wealthy and elite.
Right.
And the reality that some of them might be struggling financially.
Right. It's interesting to see that perspective.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
And finally, the report included some specific examples that really show this apparent lack of understanding among some members of Congress.
Like what kind of examples?
Well, they mentioned this congresswoman who they described as a former dancing girl.
Okay.
But she also has a law degree.
So she's a lawyer.
She's a lawyer.
Okay.
But she reportedly stated that there are no laws against coming into the United States illegally.
Wait a minute. She's a lawyer, and she said that.
That's what the report said.
I mean, that's just not true.
Right.
There are definitely laws against illegal immigration.
And the source actually responded to this statement by saying these are the numbnuts they have out there doing that kind of thing.
Wow. So even people within Congress are recognizing that there's a problem.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
And I think this really brings us back to the main point of this whole report.
Which is
that you have people transitioning from everyday jobs and experiences to these positions of immense power and responsibility. And often they're not prepared for it.
And that lack of preparation can have real consequences for the entire country.
So what are we left with after reading this report?
I mean, it's pretty concerning.
It is concerning.
It makes you wonder about the state of our government.
And I think it raises some important questions for us as citizens.
Yeah.
Like, how do we vet candidates for these positions?
Right. How do we make sure that they're qualified to do the job?
What kind of training and support do we provide for new members?
Right. Because they clearly need some help.
And ultimately, what impact does this lack of expertise have on the laws that are being passed and the decisions that are being made?
It's a lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So to sum it all up, this Politico report, which is based on interviews with members of Congress themselves, highlights some pretty serious concerns, like widespread alcohol use, questions about the mental capacity of some members, and this idea that a lot of members come from very diverse backgrounds and might not be qualified for the job.
Yeah.
And these aren't just criticisms from outsiders. These are concerns that are being voiced by the people who are actually serving in Congress.
That's an important point.
That's a very important point.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us as citizens to be aware of this.
Definitely.
And to think about what it means for our democracy.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we're the ones who elect these people.
We're the ones who elect these people.
And we need to make sure that we're putting the right people in office.
Exactly.
Right.
And that means being informed about who they are.
Absolutely.
What their qualifications are.
What they stand for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So after hearing all of this, does this change your perspective on Congress?
It definitely makes you think.
It makes you think.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point.
Right. We need to be having these conversations.
We do need to be having these conversations.
Yeah. And we need to be holding our elected officials accountable.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more about this,
yeah,
you can check out the original Politico article.
That's a good idea.
It's a very interesting read.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are other news outlets and commentators who are talking about this as well.
Right. So do your research.
Exactly.
Form your own opinions.
And most importantly, get out there and vote.
Absolutely. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me.